I'm really honored to be among a very distinguished colleagues from the world and experts, and plus the discussant and the old colleagues that who will follow us now and in the video after. We'll start with the introduction of the chairman of the ASCO International Committee, and who is also the chair of our activities. We are all shared, surely. We start with Professor David Kerr.
So wonderful to see everybody. I do apologize. I have a chest infection, so I'm coughing and spluttering a little. As I said earlier, it's great to see so many wise friends gathered together around this table. And I think all of us here to support our dear friend Ahmed Elzawawy, who's done so much for so many years to maintain the win-win initiative and to, I think, energize us to be able to support the fantastic work that he does. I think each of us gathered here has our own set of interests, our own expertise, but what unites us today is what we can do to, in a way, better deliver cost-effective cancer care. Ahmed and I have given a lot of thought to the concept of better value care, and if we can deliver that in North and South, in East and West, then this will be enormously impactful to the community of patients that each and all of us serve. And I think what has always struck me about the work that Ahmed has done has been the fact that it's been evidence-based, that there's a strong scientific platform for all the statements that we make. And I think that's what sets us apart from some others in the field. And I think it's what defines us as individuals. All of us are standing, all of us have made an academic contribution with some fantastic people, panelists, gathered around the table. So warm words of welcome from ASCO, and again from another dear friend of ours, Doug Pyle, who on behalf of ASCO as their international director, has done a fantastic piece of work with us all over many years, supporting our community and supporting ASCO's global outreach. Of course, ASCO is supporting this particular webinar, but many of the other cancer societies represented around this table play equally important parts globally and regionally. So again, thanks to each of those members and participants who come from these different societies. So very keen to get started. As always, Ahmed has done a great job in gathering together a fantastic panel of discussants. And I think having Clare as our coordinator, as our chair, I think will work very well. So thanks again for joining us, but thanks most of all to Ahmed for gathering this group of distinguished individuals. Shukran.
Thank you very much. We would like to stress always that our work is a global, it is collaborative. It is not one-man show because the challenge is too big. So all of you are the heroes of that. I'm just the facilitator. So we'll start with the recorded video of Professor David Kerr. It's not only introduction to this repurposing webinar, but the introduction of the whole series of webinars about how to lower the total cost of cancer care and control.
Hello, I'm David Kerr, Professor of Cancer Medicine from University of Oxford. Warm words of welcome from the Dreaming Spars, which you can see behind me. And I'm delighted, honoured to be part of this important webinar. Fantastic that ASCO is helping to add their name, their status to this important meeting, which we're going to talk about how we can repurpose existing drugs and new drugs in terms of what we want to do for cancer treatment. Why is this an important issue? Because globally, we need to do better in terms of access to cancer medicines. There's no question about that. Any survey ever done highlights the inequities, the unfairness that exist between countries with significant resources and those which come from lower or middle income settings. But the question is, can we use science to close that equity gap? Can we teach old drugs new tricks? And I believe that the answer is definitely yes, by looking back across early phase trials, by understanding better the pharmacology of the drugs, better control of dose delivery. We know that billions of dollars of drug are wasted every year because when we reconstitute some of these expensive medicines, there's a significant residue left behind in the reconstituted vials. Something as simple as that could be enormously impactful. We'll provide examples of this. My dear friend, Ahmed Elzawawy, who is the father of the win-win collaboration and who's been talking passionately about this subject for more years than I care to remember, has a whole series of, I think, excellent examples of how we can provide better value cancer care, not only drugs, but across radiotherapy with improved scheduling, without having to sacrifice any of the efficacy that we would hope to see from whatever regimen we deliver. An example from my own field, I'm a GI oncologist, and many years ago we established something called the Quasar Trials Group, largest adjuvant trials group in the world in its day. Quick and simple and reliable was the acronym that Quasar stood for. So we recruited tens of thousands of patients to our adjuvant colorectal cancer trials portfolio. And one of the questions that we asked and answered definitively many years ago was looking at the dose of L-folinic acid. We know that the pharmacology of combining folinic acid and 5-fluorouracil makes sense. We understand at a molecular level how we can stabilize the ternary complex of 5-fluorouracil, its active moiety, F-dump, binding to the enzyme by co-treating with folinic acid. So the basic pharmacology is very well understood. But the clinical pharmacology, we were giving 200 milligrams of DL-folinic acid. In our trial, we compared 200 versus 20 milligrams, and we found there to be no lack of efficacy whatsoever in using a 10 times lower dose. So think if we promulgated that worldwide, how much money we would save in terms of very reasonably, very strongly evidence-based, reducing the dose of the drug to 1/10 of that which was recommended. So there's one example, proven in a very large randomized trial. That's not often the case. But nevertheless, there are examples based on pharmacology, which I think would allow us, those of us who deliver cancer medicines, to be much more thoughtful about how we deliver better value cancer care, how we improve equity of access to existing drugs. That's what we're going to cover in this webinar. We'll get a fantastic cast of speakers. We really genuinely have. All friends of Ahmed that through respect, through love, always want to come to support him. So please join us in what I think will be an interactive, interesting webinar with speakers of the very highest caliber. I'm saying that unashamedly with my very large, big head. I hope not being too arrogant. But come and join us. I think you'll find it interesting. And what we need to do is to put these examples into practice and collectively together deliver better value cancer care. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you soon when you join our webinar. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Professor David Kerr. You are one of the main leader, and your leadership is very appreciated to all this movement. I would like to say here that about these seminars, all these seminars, group of seminar is focused as the GOIS, Global Oncology University, Global Oncology Implementing Science, focus on how to increase the affordability of better value cancer care and control all over the world in the real world via scientific approaches. This is focused on. Our seminar today is focused on the part of repurposing. We are always focused, as we learn from all of you. So it is the best way to achieve our goal one day. It is to be focused. Second thing, it is a collaborative work. We complement each other. If I say something, this does not mean necessarily that it's mine. This is ours. This is published. This is coming from references because we are always going based on scientific evidence. Third thing, it is our way of work is not just the number of participants and just a seminar and goodbye, but all of us have the role to disseminate this recorded video as a message about repurposing, and then after about other type of how to lower the total cost of systemic cancer therapy, and then how to lower the total cost of radiotherapy and other parts. Fourth point, that we are speaking about costs, not about price per se, because price is one element. The cost is a total thing and global thing, and all of you are working daily with very huge experience that costs maybe sometimes reducing the number of hospitalization for in surgery. This is lowering the cost. It is maybe lowering the coming of patients to hospital, to chemotherapy, to radiotherapy, or whatever, for the investigation. This is also a part of the cost. Lowering the side effects and its impact. So we are thinking globally, not the price only. So it is when we speak about cost of cancer control and treat and care and direct care. Fifth point, that we are working together to formulate something at the end of this session, to formulate it. It is our common work, collaborative work. All of us and the discussant also, we have discussant not in the panelists, but the discussant, like Will, my brother Will, and all of you, all the discussant, if you would like to contribute and send your feedback, and we would like to have a document at the end, not only one document, but reports first for the ASCO, and thank you for ASCO. Thanks for ASCO for their support, really, and their having their name and logo and everything. And thanks all friends in ASCO International. So we will have reports that, and then also we formulate together publications and maybe videos based on this session. So it is a start, not just speaking and goodbye. And all of us are contributors. All of us have your all of your weights. So and really honored to be among you. Now I give the speak to Dr. Clare Thibodeaux, and I am very deeply grateful to her. She is the coordinator, and she coordinates the discussion after these videos, and she coordinates also the formulation of the conclusion. Claire, we have recorded a speech, but if you have if you like to add a few words.
Yes, thank you, Ahmed. I just want to say thank you to Ahmed and to all of our panelists today. I'm going to echo what David said. I think we have a really fantastic group assembled, and we're going to have some discussion after we watch the recorded video. So for anybody who's watching, if you have questions, you can add them to the chat, and we'll try and address them in the discussion section. So I hope that you enjoy today and you find it to be an engaging and informative discussion.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you very much. Okay.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Clare Thibodeaux. I'm the Vice President of Scientific Affairs with CuresWithinReach. And I'd like to start today's webinar by telling you a little bit about our organization and how we use repurposing to find treatments for unsolved diseases. For those of you who don't know CuresWithinReach, we are based in Chicago. We're a nonprofit. And for more than 15 years now, we have been focused specifically on funding catalytic clinical trials that test approved therapies, whether it's a device, a drug, a nutraceutical, a diagnostic, testing these approved therapies in new indications. The trials that we fund tend to be early stage, so pilot, phase 1, phase 2A. And what we found is that when these trials are successful, they can really act as a catalytic spark to leverage additional follow-on funding for larger confirmatory trials. As an organization, CuresWithinReach is disease agnostic. We don't focus on any one particular disease or even one patient population or geography. We currently have 51 ongoing trials in our portfolio, and those trials represent 36 diseases. The trials are taking place in the United States, as well as at sites in Europe, Asia, and Africa. So despite having a disease agnostic focus, oncology has always been a large part of our portfolio. And currently, CuresWithinReach has 18 ongoing trials in oncology. Most of those are in the United States, but we do have 2 oncology trials in Africa, 1 in Nigeria, and 1 in Tanzania. And again, we cover a variety of different cancer types, as well as both adult and pediatric cancer patients. We accept submissions from PIs, from researchers, all investigator initiated. So we really listen to the researchers to tell us what they think are exciting and potentially impactful opportunities to treat cancer with repurposed therapies. And CuresWithinReach's interest in oncology is longstanding, dating back to the early 2000s when we first funded Dr. Vincent Rajkumar at the Mayo Clinic. We funded Dr. Rajkumar's work testing thalidomide in multiple myeloma. This work was successful and captured the interest of industry, and in a short period of time became approved by the US FDA to treat multiple myeloma. So at that point, thalidomide was one of the standard of cares to treat these patients. And since then, industry has gone on to develop the next generation of thalidomide called lenalidomide, which is still treating patients with multiple myeloma today. At the time that CuresWithinReach funded Dr. Rajkumar, we actually weren't focused on repurposing specifically. Instead, we were just funding medical research more generally. But it was this success with Dr. Rajkumar, as well as a few other successes we had around that time, that made us think, you know what, the fastest way to patient impact is through repurposing. And so 15 years ago, we changed our focus to solely fund repurposing trials. And when you think about it, it really does make a lot of sense. Consider that there are over 7,000 unsolved diseases in the world, as well as thousands of drugs and other therapies that are approved to treat diseases. So there must be opportunity for some of the existing drugs to help treat the unsolved diseases. Of course, drug repurposing is not a replacement for de novo drug development. De novo drug development is important and will always be a part of finding treatments for patients, but drug repurposing can really be a complement to these efforts because it is a way to find treatments for patients as quickly and as cost effectively as possible. And what we've seen over the past several years is an increase in the interest in repurposing as a drug development strategy from a variety of different groups, which is great. And we love to see that. One of the consequences is that different groups have different approaches to repurposing. Some focus solely on generic therapies. Others, like CuresWithinReach, will focus on both generic and on patent therapies. Other groups will take an even broader approach and include compounds that are human safe. So they may have been tested in a phase 1 trial, shown to be safe in humans, but then shelved for some reason instead of going down the regulatory pathway. So these groups will say, let's take that compound off the shelf and test it in a new indication. So beyond just the actual therapies themselves, there are lots of other questions to consider when talking about an approach to repurposing. These can include the dose of the therapy, the delivery method, whether or not to focus on therapies that have commercial value or have low commercial value but high potential patient impact. Should drugs that are developed in adults be tested in that same indication in patients and considered repurposing? Or should repurposing be limited to strictly drugs, or can a broader definition encompass other types of therapies as well? So the bottom line from all these questions in this discussion is that there is no single approach to repurposing. It's not a one-size-fits-all strategy, and all different strategies are valid because at the end of the day, organizations who are looking at repurposing are looking to fast-track treatments for patients with unsolved medical needs and diseases. And I think that we can agree, no matter how we define repurposing, that is an important and worthy strategy. So with that said, let me share CuresWithinReach's definition of repurposing, which is taking an approved therapy, again, whether that's a drug, device, nutraceutical, or diagnostic, and testing that in a new disease area. So this definition of repurposing, where we are looking at specifically approved therapies, will be the context for the rest of the webinar today. Once again, I'd like to thank you for your time. I hope that you are looking forward to the rest of the panel. I know that I am, and I hope that you find it engaging and informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire Thibodeaux. As you know, Claire Thibodeaux is Dr. Claire Thibodeaux is the Vice President of CuresWithinReach, which is foundation in Chicago. And really, they do a lot of work. Visit their website, and you'll find that a lot of opportunities for repurposing in different fields, not only in oncology. And they have also a group of always they present opportunities for people, our colleagues in low middle income countries, and not only in Chicago, or for also for rare diseases, and this is very important also. Thank you, Claire, and please, you have a leadership role in running the discussion after we finish the videos. Thank you, and for the conclusion also.
So I believe we have another video coming up next. I believe it's a video from Ahmed himself talking about different types of repurposing and an overview of repurposing. So are we ready to? Okay.
It is coming.
Excellent. While Ahmed works to get that going, I just want to say once again that we're very excited to be with you all today. We're going to be hearing perspectives from different aspects of repurposing and oncology care. So again, to the attendees, as you're watching, please feel free to submit questions via the chat function in Zoom. We will be having a discussion once the videos have completed. We'll be talking a little bit amongst ourselves as a panel, and then we'll be addressing some of the questions that have been submitted. So please don't feel that you have to wait. You can certainly submit your questions at any time, and we can address those a little bit later on.
Hello, I am Ahmed Elzawawy. I present to you here a quick notes on required actions. Among our calls for of the Win-Win Initiative, Win-Win International Scientific Initiative are international campaign for the repurposing and repositioning of drugs, nutraceutical procedures and devices. Also, global repository for project, a new idea and proposal for repurposing and repositioning of drugs and devices. International campaign, yes, we support the notion that the topic of repurposing and repositioning should be part of interest of all cancer organizations and big cancer society and their conferences and publication and journal. So we recommend to advocate for this and to be part of our recommendations and conclusion and advocacy. I hope so to be this part to be included. A global repository, one of the typical approaches that need web-based repository is the repurposing and repositioning. As mentioned above, the Redo project is very important and leading project in this field. Another example is the CuresWithinReach, or it could be also a global repository that includes those, or this is according to the will of the doers. But global repository is always next. Going to the concept of the win-win initiative, the notion of the win-win movement implies that the initiative does not aim to prevent manufacturers of new drugs and devices from gaining and flourishing, but to the contrary, all will win. That's what we stress on. I think so. It is doubtful that the big pharmaceutical company would be able to follow their goal in the future using the old model of developing exclusive new drugs that can be sold at high prices. Numerous drugs will be coming off patent in the next few years, opening a way for generics and eliminating an important source of the industry profits. Hence, there is a need to search to innovative strategic action that can position a company as a continuous winner. I would like that we stress on this. If you agree with me or you modify this, it will be mandatory that all level of management, particularly the top strategic planning level, will carry out the extraordinary task of creating innovative strategic actions and of preparing and informing all of their companies, human resources, in using innovative tactics and strategies. One of the many approaches that we use, we see that it could be beneficial for some industry to invest in the research for repurposing of their products, hence increasing the chance of their own products, hence increasing the chance of gaining more from an increase in sales due to different indication and uses in the forthcoming years. On the other hand, from the point of view of the global, this could be one of the several smart methods for sustainable increasing of access to some expensive treatment within a global win-win campaign, and not as dispersed or solitary endeavor that could be undertaken for opportunistic and very short-term benefits. I would like that we advocate together for a more wider scale. I wish that we stress on the previous notes on our recommendation, reports, and potential publication, and to show follow up in the next webinar about this issue, maybe after 6 or 12 months. What do you think? Surely it is up to you and to feedback of all colleagues. Thank you all. Ahmed Elzawawy. And going forward in fruitful cooperation, hand in hand. Looking to hearing from all you
Thank you all.
As you see, we have a lot of work. This is not just the 2 hours of seminars. We start off many things that needs many smart approaches, many thinking together to develop together, and really the favor and will be for all of you as leaders of this and the feedback from all. Now we will pass to next.
So next, I believe we have a presentation from Dr. Pantziarka from the Anti-Cancer Fund. Pan is the program director for drug repurposing at the Anti-Cancer Fund, and he's also the coordinator of the Redo project that Ahmed just mentioned, repurposing drugs in oncology. We're very excited to hear from Pan today, again, first through his recorded video, and then as part of the panel discussion following the video presentations.
It is coming.
Hello everybody. I'd like to begin by thanking the organisers for giving me this opportunity to talk about a subject very close to my heart, which is drug repurposing in oncology. Let me begin with some conflicts of interest. I have no financial conflicts of interest. I work for the Anti-Cancer Fund, which is a not-for-profit. We do not engage in commercial drug development projects. We are not interested in developing intellectual property or commercial access, and our scientific work is open source. We aren't motivated by profit. We want to find new treatment options for cancer patients. To do this, we're interested in those areas of cancer research where there is no commercial interest. So that includes drug repurposing, but also therapy optimization, which seeks to reduce dosing or changing schedules of existing treatments. And we're interested in collaboration and consortium building. So what are some of the issues which are driving drug repurposing? And the first one is financial toxicity. In these charts here, you can see in the blue lines the increase in pricing for new cancer drugs approved by the FDA, and in yellow you can see the ESMO and ASCO clinical benefit scores, and you can see there that what's happening is a trend towards fast increasing prices of new cancer drugs and flatlined or declining benefit. So we're paying more for drugs which are actually delivering less. When we put this into a global context, we can see that the pricing for these new drugs in low and middle income countries is absolutely exorbitant. Factor in also the increase in incidence that we expect in oncology, and we have a situation that is getting worse, not better, over time. And we have a situation now where many drugs are not affordable in low and middle income countries, but many of the new drugs are not affordable even in the high income countries. So health disparities will worsen both intra-country and inter-country. Another issue is that we have neglected malignancies. Although there have been massive improvements in some cancers, in others there has been no change in decades. So we can see overall survival in osteosarcoma has not changed since the 1970s. Similarly, for glioblastoma, hardly any change in overall survival. And this is partly driven by the fact that for rarer cancers, there are no commercial imperatives that are driving development at the same extent as in some of the more common cancers. So despite improvement in some cancers and some incremental change, then we really do need to move forward to improve survival in sarcomas, ovarian, pancreatic cancers, and metastatic disease remains problematic everywhere. So can repurposing make a difference? And for us, let's look at the definition first. We define repurposing as the use of an existing licensed medication for a new medical indication, so for a disease that the drug was not originally developed for. Repurposing is becoming more popular, and there are many different definitions, but that's our working definition. The reason for focusing on existing drugs is that we already know a lot about these drugs. We know not just the common side effects, but the rare side effects. We understand PK, PD, dosing, and so on. Many of the drugs are available globally, and often they have low cost. And we have decades of clinical experience on which to draw. This means then, in theory, that drug repurposing speeds up the development cycle. We can skip early phase trials. It could be cheaper and also safer. And so from a patient perspective, often more convenient, because these are oral drugs that are easier to take and less dangerous than newly developed molecules. Repurposing exists on a spectrum. It's not an all or nothing. And so it's quite common that we take a cancer drug developed in one disease and apply it to a new disease, but some of these jumps are actually quite difficult. Taking a drug developed for a blood cancer and applying that to a solid tumor is quite a big jump. We call this kind of development soft repurposing. And at the other end of the scale where the anti-cancer fund is focused, we find non-cancer drugs being reused to treat cancer. So the BCG vaccine from tuberculosis to bladder cancer, thalidomide with its horrendous history being reused for multiple myeloma. We call this use of non-cancer drugs for oncology treatment hard repurposing, because it's a bigger jump and harder to implement. But given that, we have no lack of candidates. As part of our work with the Repurposing Drugs in Oncology project, we developed a database of non-cancer drugs that showed evidence of efficacy in cancer, and currently we have 371 candidate drugs on that list. We also track the clinical trial activity for these drugs, and so we are looking at active trials, trials which are currently recruiting, and there we find 971 active trials that are planned to include 167,000 patients across 44 countries. So there is quite a lot of activity there, and you can see that the most popular drugs are things like metformin, celecoxib, aspirin, hydroxychloroquine. So lots of positive trial activity there. Let's look at a recent successful example of hard drug repurposing. The FMO, also called eflornithine, is an old drug that was used to treat West African sleeping sickness. Its mechanism of action is the inhibition of ODC in polyamine synthesis, which is a driver of neuroblastoma. There was data from preclinical models and a trial, phase 2 trial, that showed the FMO treatment reduced the risk of relapse by 50%, and relapse is a major cause of death in the high-risk population of children with neuroblastoma. Now, it took a long time, lots of preclinical and clinical work, huge collaborative effort involving parents and families, as well as scientists and doctors, but finally this has led to a drug approval. So this is another rare example of a hard drug repurposing success story. I'll finish with a work in progress. Angiosarcoma is a rare vascular soft tissue sarcoma. With standard treatments are taxanes or anthracyclines, and the response rates are poor, and overall survival is under 10 months. So a disease that's urgently in need of new treatments. We reviewed work that showed that the drug propranolol, the original beta blocker, actually has multiple relevant pathways that it affects, and some tremendous preclinical work has been done, and we now have a series of case reports showing that propranolol actually can be effective for some patients with angiosarcoma. A huge set of case reports, including from low and middle income countries, showing that the cases have responded. And of course, what we want now is more prospectively collected data to find the best combination of propranolol and standard treatment so we can to make this another success story. Thank you.
Now, the next record will be for Professor Sikora. I ask Dr. Clare Thibodeaux to present my old friend, dear friend Sikora.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. So the next speaker is Professor Karol Sikora, as Ahmed mentioned. He is the professor of medicine at the University of Buckingham and is an honorary consultant oncologist at Hammersmith Hospital in London, as well as the medical director of Cancer Partners International. So he's wearing many hats and he has many accomplishments, far too long to list right here today. But one of the most impressive that I found in his bio was he's written over 500 papers and edited 20 books on oncology. So we're thrilled to hear a video from him talking about the question of funding for repurposing in the real world.
I'm Karol Sikora. I've been Clinical Director of Cancer Services for West London for about 25 years. Before that, I was Vice President of Drug Development for Cancer at AstraZeneca and also Director of the World Health Organization Cancer Program. Repurposing drugs is a curious area. The biggest problem, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is purely money. Who pays for drug development of drugs that are generic, often cheap as chips, really cheap, aspirin, metformin, absolutely made in bulk. And some of them, in many countries, can be obtained over the counter. So you're putting the patient in the driving seat. Fantastic. And yet, we don't use them on the whole. And it's really only because it's a very difficult concept to monetize. How are you going to actually commercially develop a scheme? So the only example I've got is a group called Care Oncology in Harley Street, the sort of the elite district of London's medicine. They offer 4 drugs, metformin, atorvastatin, doxycycline, mebendazole, to cancer patients as an adjunct to their treatment. They're not really oncologists. They charge an awful lot of money for a consultation, £500 for the first consultation for 45 minutes. The normal consultation fee in Harley Street for a proper oncologist is only about £250. So it's a very curious model. What they offer is a program. It's said to be tailored individually, but actually everyone gets the same thing. And they're drugs that are being repurposed, because obviously the 4 drugs I mentioned are for other things. Metformin for diabetes, atorvastatin for ischemic heart disease with cholesterols, and mebendazole is an antihelminthic, and doxycycline is an antibiotic. So how do you find out? How do we deal with this? Who is going to pay? Well, we can discount Big Pharma. They're not interested. In fact, they don't care about this sort of area. They leave it to people that are funded either by charity or by public funds. If you take charity, the costs are still too high. a proper clinical trial randomized over a period of 5 years for, just say, metformin would cost about $10 million to do in a specific disease. And then you could say, should we do a specific type of cancer, say colon cancer, or a whole range of a basket of cancers? And that's the problem, how to structure the trials to prove it. And then if you do prove it, you can't sell the drug at a more expensive price. There's no way you can say we have the intellectual property patented so that if you use this drug for cancer, we're going to charge you more than if you use it for diabetes or for some other indication, such as a statin for cholesterol reduction. So there are profound financial problems that are driving the area underground. How can you do proper studies? So however enthusiastic you are, it's almost impossible to get funding for this. What about charities? What about the National Cancer Institute, public funds that are sort of semi-charitable? They have a charitable arm. Well, it's a nice idea, but it's not practical. And that's the problem with this whole area. Trash can drugs, repurposing drugs, trying to find old gold in old pots is always going to be difficult because of the financial implications and the lack of any profit for anybody that does the work. And when I say profit, even if it's not for profit, the lack of being able to cover your costs for doing it. So an academic department in a poorer country could say, let's do a study of aspirin in a range of cancers as an adjuvant and see what happens. Now, you could do that, but it's a lot of work. You've got to do it properly. It's got to be a randomized study, and you've got to have a protocol which you don't violate. You've got to, if you say you're going to do an assessment scan or an assessment marker every 3 months, you've got to do it. Otherwise, the protocol becomes void. So I think there are huge challenges here, all of which come down to money. So what is one solution? Let's be positive and going forward. The Bill Gates solution. Can we persuade some global philanthropist, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, on to say, let's fund this, let's put money into this, let's put $100 million in, and let's go through all the ideas in, and they're all very similar. They're all sort of semi-metabolic pathway drugs. Let's get those and look at what clinical trial results we can get by going forward. That, to me, is the only way this will be solved. It can't be lower and middle income countries putting their own money into this, even though they would be the ones that would gain the most. There's nothing to be had for big pharma. There's no shareholder value, as they'd call it, in this field. So only a single big donation to move this forward is likely to work. So I think we should work on those that have the foundations, that have sizable capacity to develop this, because it is a very good idea indeed. Thank you.
To prepare the videos of Professor Hussein Khaled and Attar and my old leader, Eduardo Cazap. Please introduce me, Claire. I present another one till we prepare the other videos, because come late all the time.
Well, so next we'll be hearing another video from Ahmed Elzawawy, and as you have seen, he is a leader in this area, putting all of his passion and efforts to really trying to find global solutions to address oncology care for patients everywhere, regardless of their where they live or their ability to avail themselves of these services. And I think that his leadership of the Win-Win initiative, as well as the Global Oncology Implementing Science program, has really shown his desire, not only, as he says, to talk about these issues, but to also take steps to make a difference. So let's hear the next video from Dr. Ahmed Elzawawy.
But it is a common leadership, and also the heroes The real heroes will be the doers everywhere in the world. We don't claim any praise or any glory. If we succeed together to lessen the burden of some millions patients around the world, then would be the success. We don't search for any glory. Thank you very much. Thank you, Claire. Hello. I present here a quick, rapid proposal for types of repurposing. For simplicity, one, drugs either single or in combination for humans or different uses, including cancer, nutraceutical, diagnostic devices and procedures, treatment devices, and drugs for veterinary uses. Example of scientific approaches for repurposing drug related to cancer: single all the drugs, new uses in cancer, potential new profits, because we stress on this, searching for potential new profits. All the non-cancer drugs, new uses in cancer, potential new profits. All the cancer drug, new uses in non-cancer, potential new profits. B, newer combination of all the cancer drug with new communication and benefits. All the cancer drug, as you know, cisplatin, metronidazole, oral therapy, and estradiol. Cisplatin, it is not useful in treatment of triple negative, but what is new is that could be considered triple negative breast cancer, is that it could be considered as a true targeted chemotherapy, and maybe not, but there is studies about this. True targeted chemotherapy. The metronomic oral therapy, previously it was thought that they act by targeting angiogenesis, but recently additional mechanism has been discovered which established metronomic chemotherapy as type of multi-targeted therapy. Detailed pharmacogenomics and pharmacoproteomic studies on tumor endothelial cells and larger multi-center clinical trials are needed. Metronomic studies includes many drugs now that ninarabine, cyclophosphamide, capecitabine, methotrexate, etopsid, sorafenib. Yes. And moreover, there are recent studies on absorption of oral gemcitabine. Yes, oral gemcitabine in studies. Estradiol. In phase 2 trial, low dose 6 mg per day, oral estradiol achieved the same response as usual high dose 30 mg per day in approximately 30% of patients with fewer adverse events than with a usual dose of postmenopausal with aromatase inhibitor resistant hormone receptor positive advanced breast cancer. It's amazing, 30% response in aromatase inhibitor resistant. But it is very cheap. Estradiol in triple negative breast cancer. Yes, in triple negative breast cancer. Estrogen receptor B, a second form of estrogen receptor, is expressed in approximately 25% of triple negative breast cancer. All the non-cancer drug new uses in cancer, potential new profits. More than 30, about 30 example of non-cancer drugs, the purpose of the treatment, the repurposing for the treatment of cancer are shown, are published by our friend Pantziarka here, and other publisher also. So it is an example of 30 example of non-cancer drugs. Metformin, I am not very enthusiastic for metformin because there are many stress about it, but it still need further studies. But one of the interesting things that I saw that one of the new exciting studies that metformin has been shown to directly inhibit the sonic hedgehog pathway, a key pathway in basal cell carcinoma. It's just a proposal. The win-win initial point of view is the effect of metformin in basal cell carcinoma could be tested and subjected to more trials, as it could be a valuable benefit for white-skinned people, particularly in countries such as Australia and South Africa. What do you think? It's just a thought. Antidepressant drug paroxetine, may stop growth of childhood owing sarcoma. There are some studies about this in Karolinska Institute and MD Anderson. A combination of doxycycline, azithromycin, vitamin C. I'm not very enthusiastic for this, but I present it, maybe it's right, for targeting mitochondria and eradicating a cancer stem cell. A new use of chemotherapy drugs in non-malignant gemcitabine, imatinib may show slowed. I'll show this. Gemcitabine. Perhaps many may not remember that gemcitabine was first developed as antiviral drug. It itself is repurposed. Gemcitabine was found to be active against 19 different strains of methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus and against glycopeptide intermediate Staphylococcus aureus. A strain resistant to all glycopeptide antibiotic, including vancomycin. So the repurposed use of gemcitabine in such a case would be life-saving. Isn't it interesting? Imatinib in tuberculosis. According to World Health Organization, estimated that 2 billion people are infected with TB, and 500,000 would die yearly. Imatinib as a potential host-directed therapeutic for drug-resistant tuberculosis infection and HIV TB co-infection, which is less 1/10 of those used in female. With the dose less than 1/10. By targeting the host, not the mycobacteria itself. Also, imatinib may slow the course of diabetes, of the type 1 diabetes. Our point of view here, and the win-win, what do you think? Think about it. The idea of finding wider uses of inexpensive cancer drugs such as imatinib in different repurposing, evidence-based indication, could be smart and scientific way to achieve the wider use and sales of a drug, and potentially to increase access to cancer treatment. This, in addition to increasing its value of the drug and beneficial indication for patients. Fluorouracil is repairing skin wrinkles and sun damage. Do you imagine this? Fluorouracil claim. So it is comparable to that seen with laser treatment of photo aging. A newer combination research performed 300,000 experiments to test 5,000 different combinations of 100 approved cancer drugs. Do you imagine this? This happened. This is published. But I don't see much enthusiasm in this. No. In each of these 1,000 approved cancer cells, in each 60 cell line developed by the National Cancer Institute, USA. It is present. It's published. The new NCI hopes to accelerate the advancement of new therapeutic recommendations that demonstrate minimum side effects and maximum benefits. If confirmed, this will form a basis of future clinical trials of such combination. My comment, and this to you all, what do you think? There are many examples of repurposing drugs, not only this, that could be very promising, and they need more funded studies. The question is, there hope to see more stimulation and appealing approaches. Thank you all. Claire, s'il vous plaît, if you can present the second record of my friend, my old friend, Professor Hussein Khaled.
Absolutely. The next video that we'll be watching is presented by Professor Hussein Khaled, who is the Professor Emeritus of Medical Oncology at Cairo University. He's also the former Dean of the Egyptian National Cancer Institute and former Minister of Higher Education of Egypt. Professor Khaled will be talking about barriers and obstacles to repurposing.
Now we are going to discuss in short barriers and obstacles of repurposing and repositioning of cancer drugs. The first barrier is the general lack of trust among the oncology society, including the healthcare providers and even the patients. An international campaign for the repurposing and repositioning of drugs, procedures, and devices should be adopted by concerned bodies. The second barrier is the technical and biological aspects. And one of the examples of these technical aspects is discussed in this manuscript and this paper, and it discussed the possible anti-cancer activity of 4 non-cancerous drugs on 3 cell lines, as you can see here from these figures. This article concluded that the 4 tested drugs may have cytotoxic effects against hepatic, breast, and cervical carcinoma cells. Although this in vitro concentration of the 4 drugs tested in the present study were effective concentrations, it cannot be practically used in vivo in human beings, since the range of these concentrations are far higher than the peak plasma levels of these drugs when given to patients. However, if we may use a different schedule of administration, like using metronomic low-dose prolonged exposure schedule, or using these drugs as potentiating agents to other anti-cancer medications, may be possible for clinical application. The third, of course, you know about the pressure of pharmaceutical industry, and this is a very common and very chronic problem. Lastly is the lack of fund and supporting projects. However, examples include the REDO project, which is a very important and leading project in this field. Also, the CuresWithinReach, which has its secure accelerator platform where purposing stakeholders can read hundreds of public abstracts for research projects submitted to the CWR. And lastly is the win-win initiative. But of course, this is not enough, and we need to have more and more projects and help. And thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Professor Hussein. Now we are preparing the video of Attar. If it's technical difficult, as you know, Attar. Attar, then you speak. Yes, it is. Yes, you will. Okay, please, Claire, introduce our colleague Attar. He's not only a speaker, but it is a hero in doing research in repurposing.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to introduce the next video given by Professor Atara Ntekim. He is a clinical oncologist with the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, and he is also a funded CuresWithinReach researcher. Professor Atara Ntekim is going to be talking today a little bit about his real-world experience and current experience conducting clinical trials and clinical research using repurposed therapies in oncology.
Good day, everyone. I am Dr. Atara Ntekim, a clinical oncologist with the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. My clinical and research interests are on breast and prostate cancers, which are parts of endocrine-associated malignancies. I am also interested in the conduct of clinical trials in sub-Saharan Africa, which at present is very, very low. I am indeed grateful to the organizers of this meeting for inviting me to this presentation, which is on the repurposing of existing drugs for the treatment of cancers. This promises to bring hope for patients in sub-Saharan Africa by allowing them to get more cheaper drugs that can be used for their treatment. At present, timely access to effective drugs for the treatment of cancer is low. For example, it took like 8 years since Herceptin was approved for the treatment of HER2-positive breast cancer for it to be approved and available in Nigeria for our patients to use. Likewise, palbociclib for the treatment of ER-positive metastatic breast cancer. At present, a drug like tucatinib, which is effective in the treatment of breast metastasis that was licensed over 4 years ago, is still not available for us in Nigeria, so our patients cannot have access to them. Now, even when these drugs are available, especially the targeted therapies, their cost is prohibitive for most of our patients who are of low socioeconomic status. Though we have health insurance, but the health insurance is not actually helpful. At present, in our population, only like 10% of the population is covered by health insurance. And even then, the insurance managers shy away from paying for anti-cancer treatment because they feel it's very expensive. And so our patients are left to pay out of pocket for most of their treatments. There is very little to which they can go, especially in getting most effective drugs that are needed. I have been involved in repurposing activities through some studies which we are currently carrying on. That is on repurposing of clofaximine and anti-rape drugs for the treatment of triple-negative breast cancer. This study is being supported by CuresWithinReach organization, of which we are very grateful for their support. Now, the prevalence of triple-negative breast cancer is very high in West Africa. Up to 40% of the subtypes of breast cancer is triple-negative breast cancer, and younger patients are mostly affected, and the disease is very aggressive. And of course, as of now, there is no targeted therapy that is very effective against triple-negative breast cancer. So there is a high rate of mortality and morbidity associated with this subtype of breast cancer in Nigeria. Now, the Wnt signaling pathway is reported to be prominent in most triple-negative breast cancer. So they are responsible for the initiation of the malignancies and also for metastasis, and of course for the formation of cancer stem cells, which may later lead to recurrence even when one thinks that the primary tumor has been removed completely. So with this, there are preclinical evidence that clofaximine, which is an anti-leprosy drug, has some effects on triple-negative breast cancer. So that is why we intend to use this drug to see whether in the clinical setting we can demonstrate this effect. For this first study, our initial objective is to look for the maximum tolerated dose of clofaximine that can be combined with standard chemotherapy for triple-negative breast cancer. In addition to this, we also want to see the proportion of breast cancer that express the protein that is associated with the Wnt pathway, which is beta-catenin, among our triple-negative breast cancer, which can then be used as a biomarker of a response for the treatment of this disease. Now, while carrying out this study, we have some few challenges in repurposing. The first one is the fact that sometimes the repurposed drugs, some of them might have ceased to be produced by the manufacturing companies. So sometimes a little bit scarce to look at it. Now, this could be demonstrated in the first study that we wanted to do. That was repurposing of nevirapine, which is an anti-HIV drug, as a radiosensitizer in the treatment of cervical cancer. because of some preclinical reports that nevirapine could act as an effective radiosensitizer for the treatment of cervical cancer. Then during the planning for the accessibility of the study, we found out that nevirapine was very scarce to be sourced, likely because there were newer drugs that replaced it for the treatment of HIV. And so that was a problem for us. We couldn't get access to it, and then we couldn't actually know how to go about it. So we had to drop it. Now, the other instance that we are seeing is that sometimes when we repurpose drugs that are used for some not very pleasant diseases, like now we are repurposing a drug for leprosy for patients, the participants are concerned why we should be giving them a drug that is used to treat leprosy. Sometimes they may feel that we are hiding the proper diagnosis for them and from them. Instead of trying to treat them for the breast cancer, we are not treating them for leprosy or HIV, as the case may be. So that may cause some problems for the patients who may want to participate. So it needs a lot of education and specifying to be able to convince some of them that it's actually used for triple-negative breast cancer. The other issue is that there are some antagonists of repurposing that feel that if you repurpose drugs, that drug may not be available for the primary indications. And then they feel that repurposing should be discouraged, especially for drugs that are having some current indications. For instance, it's like if we are now using rifaximin and find out that it's effective against triple-negative breast cancer, this may compete with those that are needing it for leprosy that it was primarily meant for. And so it may lead to scarcity or the high cost of such drugs for the primary indicating conditions. An example was quoted during the COVID when it was proposed that chloroquine, which is an anti-malaria drug that is widely available in tropical countries, could be useful for COVID. And since that this discovery was mentioned, the price of chloroquine went up astronomically. It was only because chloroquine is no more the first line of drug for treatment of malaria. That is why we could still cope in the tropical countries. Otherwise, malaria treatment would have been very, very extensive. And of course, repurposing is a clinical trial that has to be done for us to determine the sequencing, the dosage, and of course, the toxicity and effectiveness. So this thing is funding. I know that the organizers of this group will be able to have some solutions to some of the problems associated. Thank you very much for your attention while we wait for other discussions on the issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that that video. And we now have our final video, which will be presented by Professor Eduardo Cazap. He is the president and founder of the Latin America and Caribbean Society of Medical Oncology, as well as the past chair of ASCO International Affairs Committee. He's a co-editor of the global section of The Oncologist, as well as editor-in-chief of eCancer. So we will be listening to some ideas for future directions from Professor Cazap before we start heading into our discussion.
And I add something that we prefer to Professor Eduardo Cazap at the end, because this is the experience, my old friend and all the big experience of Eduardo Cazap and his leadership is needed in front of us, is a way to do together. Thank you, Eduardo, for all. Thank you really.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Okay, the video. Now we are playing the video.
Dear colleagues, thank you for this kind invitation to participate in this webinar about repurposing of drugs in cancer care at the global scale. We have been sharing with the previous speakers interesting presentations and visions about drugs access and treatments access for cancer and for procedures. Actually, one of the issues that we need to discuss is if the problem is the price of the drugs or the problem is the cost of the drugs. We know the price, but we don't know the cost. And that, due to the experience with other medical treatments such as vaccines in the world, have demonstrated that there is a complete different situation between costs and prices. Mainly differences from country to country and differences from region to region. So the issue of repurposing or repositioning all drugs or classic drugs, medication, have been explained by previous experts. But I believe that we should consider in our discussions not only price, but also dosage. Approval of drugs with overdosage that is in excess of the necessary medical indication for clinical use. We need to discuss sequence of administration of drugs that are also important in the total cost of cancer care, such as, for example, inpatient care or outpatient care. We saw also the discussion of drugs that are not classical drugs in the cancer armamentarium, such as metformin or aspirin, but there are other cases of all drugs that were not tested for cancer care in the way that we can understand that they can be used today, not only alone, but also in combination with modern drugs to increase effectiveness or diminish toxicities. It is possible that anti-cancer drug repurposing improves cancer care? Absolutely yes. Reality, very difficult to apply. No interest from pharma companies, or very low interest. Interest usually from NGOs, foundations, civil organizations, patients organizations, but without the understanding and support of pharma companies and governments, really the challenge from a global perspective is very difficult to overcome. The question of funding in the real world, Dr. Sikora did an excellent presentation about funding. I think that we can share a couple of points about this for the future. Barriers and obstacles, I have mentioned it before, mainly the lack of interest from pharma companies, and just in the recent years, some governments like China, India, Israel, Brazil are considering options in this aspect to participate in a governmental position together with other stakeholders as a players in this enterprise. So I believe that we can discuss during the discussion in the next minutes 3 or 4 possible options One is to try the global community, WHO, perhaps the United Nations, a global cancer fund. A global cancer fund, similarly to AIDS, may be an option, but this type of project must include innovative and new ways of drug development really to be successful and possible to give to patients and doctors new avenues and possibilities. Another option is, as I have been talking with you, the governmental participation. China is today developing their own drugs, not making copies, not making biosimilars, developing a full list, a pipeline of new drugs for cancer care. So governments may play soon a fundamental role in all this crucial global problem. Along with governments or in combination, public-private partnerships may be also an option. Research agencies, governments, research groups, not only from the north, from the south, from the east, from the west of our globe. But I think that there is room for improvement with new strategies for drug development from pharma companies. Pharma companies need urgently to update the whole process of drug development, since basic research to clinical research and cancer care. I think that this is perhaps one of the more important and well-known avenues and possibilities for work together. The global cancer community must improve the links, improve the contacts, brainstorm together, and develop new avenues with bold innovation and the support of all parties involved. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, the great leader, Eduardo Cazap, and the old companion along many years. We have a lot to do together now in this mission, as you indicated exactly. There is a lot to do together, and it's very important. Now it is Dr. Clare Thibodeaux will coordinate the discussion, 15-minute discussion, and please, the floor is for you. You are all the leaders.
Well, thank you so much, Ahmed, and thank you to all the panelists. I think that we had so much food for thought with those excellent presentations. We could have a conversation that lasted hours and hours, but we'll do our best in the next 15 minutes or so to tackle some of these questions. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat so that I can share them with the group. But as we're waiting for some of those questions to come in, I'll start with one myself. And we've talked about some of the obstacles to conducting this research, the main one being funding, but funding isn't the only obstacle. So I was wondering if the panelists could talk about some of the other pieces that need to kind of come together into place to really have repurposing as a treatment strategy for oncology to really develop and grow and become a larger effort. So I'm going to start with Pan from the Anti-Cancer Fund, because I know that you have done some work in this area, and then we'll move on to some of the other panelists. So Pan, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Aside from funding, there's another related issue, which is licensing. So assuming we show in good clinical trials that a generic drug or even a new drug has got efficacy, to get that new use in the new cancer on label requires a company. So even for aspirin, a drug that's more than 100 years old, if we want to add colorectal cancer as an indication, we would need a company to file this. So the investigators, they can invest all the money they like, they can run the trial no matter how big the trial is. At the end of the day, you need a company. Now, there are programs in the UK and there are regulatory changes proposed for Europe that will change that. But at the moment, it's a big hurdle. You need a company to get registration. And for us, using a drug off-label is suboptimal. We want these repurposed drugs to be on label and in the guidelines and easily accessible to patients.
Thank you, Pan. Hussein, I see that you have your hand raised. Do you want to add to that?
Hussein.
Thank you thank you very much first, because it is very interesting and very enthusiastic discussion, really. I want to tell you a problem in Egypt, and then I will add 2 comments. I have been chairing the committee for putting cancer treatment clinical practice guidelines for cancer in the country, in Egypt, for more than 100 million people. And I'm trying, in view of the limited budget, to try to make some kind of a cost-effective guidelines or practice guidelines. I am facing a hell of problems with the pharmaceutical industry, and even with my colleagues and physicians and medical oncologists that are affiliated to these companies. And I don't see a way that I may put a drug have been used for hypertension, for example, and the combination for treating patients. They do not accept the omission of the atezolizumab, the pembrolizumab, and these are very expensive drugs. So I'm not sure that they are going to accept this kind of changing the purpose of the new drugs. And also the IRBs. IRBs is a real problem. I wonder from my Nigerian colleague how he did all these clinical trials in Nigeria without, I found it impossible to do this in Egypt, for example. This is my problem. Now, I quite agree with Professor Eduardo Cazap that the Chinese medicine is very important. And it is not only important as a cytotoxic drug, but it may be added to the standard treatment to improve the quality of life, to decrease the side effects of the treatment. This is very important. The last comment is about, how to, and this is for you, how to join the CuresWithinReach. I think that this could be a very good avenue for us here, provided that we may have joint projects that are done worldwide. So I will be able for some time to help or to convince my colleagues to be part of this. Thank you very much again. And my last thanks is for Professor Elzawawy and Professor David Kerr, and for you, of course, for this marvelous webinar that are completely different from those we hear in the ASCO or ESMO with the pressure of the pharmaceutical industry.
Well, thank you for that. I'm happy to talk to you about CuresWithinReach offline so that we can focus our conversation with our limited time here today. I see a few hands up. I see hands clapping, so thank you for that. There is a gentleman on an iPhone. You don't have a name, but you do have a hand up. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask the panel?
Yes. My name is Professor Twalib Ngoma of Muhimbili in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. First of all, I want to thank all the panelists for the very informative, interesting presentations. Repurposing of drugs is very important, especially for low and middle income countries. A lot of issues were raised in these presentations, starting from financial toxicity of the current treatment regimes we have, the barriers that we have in repurposing, mentioned by Professor Khaled Hussein. But I wanted to really dwell on funding, a presentation which was made by Professor Sikora. You see, all these good things are only going to help humanity if they are put into use. Funding seems to be a big problem. It was very clear that pharma is not willing to fund research on repurposing. Governments likewise are having a lot of the competing priorities. Now we have to look at philanthropy. How can we convince philanthropy like Bill Gates or any other really to get an interest to fund research on repurposing of drugs? Clare, can you, before the end of this webinar, give 3+, 3- and 3 interesting points about repurposing that we could use to convince philanthropy to fund this kind of research? Because they're very difficult. They decide to fund things they want to fund, and if something is not very sexual, they just ignore it completely. So in summary, I mean, I have listened, I got a minus point, an interesting point about repurposing that one could use really to convince Big Pharma to fund this. Because we're having a webinar on implementation science. We really need to move from just academia to implementing, get the evidence and have the evidence implemented. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and I'll let some of the panelists address some of your questions, but I do want to make a point about pharma. In our experience at CuresWithinReach, pharma is interested in repurposing, but maybe not in the same way. They certainly don't like to call it repurposing. They call it things like life cycle management when they're trying to find new indications for their on-patent therapies. And then there are some pharma companies that are interested in taking generic drugs or drugs that are ending their patent life and seeing if they can reformulate it, see if they can find some sort of IP and with a repurposed indication. So I feel like I want to share that there is some opportunity for pharma in repurposing. It's how we bring them into the conversation, how we talk to them, and how we can start to build that relationship. So now I'm going to turn it over to Professor Sikora, who can address some of your questions about his comments about funding.
Yeah, I'm sorry if I came over rather negative about it. I admire everything you're doing, especially Pan, because I think he's got it right there, doing these multiple studies on drugs. I think the problem is how you can get people interested. And I know that pharma could be interested if it was an adjunct to their own some expensive regimen they have, and if you could show a repurposed drug can enhance an expensive drug, but that's no good to us because that's not going to increase the value proposition of the whole system. I think also, you know, my emails get bombarded with Medscape, I'm sure as you all do, and it's all about CDK4/6 inhibitors. For goodness sake, it's a very competitive field. These are expensive drugs for a poor country to buy for a lot of people with breast cancer. So I think that's the trouble. Doctors are bombarded sort of subliminally almost by information about high-cost drugs of relatively little value compared with some of the basic drugs. When I was in the WHO, we published a paper with Dr. Ngoma and various other people about an essential drug list for cancer, and there was only 17 drugs. Now, I've looked back on it, and there's only about 20 drugs now that you really consider essential for cancer. The others, all the expensive tyrosine kinases, you can just forget. It's just not cost effective in an environment in a LMIC. So I think how you can get this funded is so important, and we can talk and talk about it, but without the money to run a valid trial, and it's going to be expensive, even if you run it in sub-Saharan Africa, because you've got to have rigid control and it's got to be randomized, and these are very difficult concepts to get over.
Oh.
The costs are no different from running a trial on a drug that's a cheap drug than an expensive drug. The infrastructure costs of the trial are the same. So I think we've got to address this. And, you know, my suggestion that we find a global fund to do it. Now, someone else talked about global fund in the WHO. My experience is the WHO have no money for this sort of thing and wouldn't get involved in this. We need to find a philanthropic fund that would do it as a project. And I think it needs about $100 million to get going. It would be a great project to take to LMICs to do rather than to do in Europe or North America. And I think there's enough enthusiasm around to do this. It's just a matter of getting that funding. So maybe we should, Clare and some of the other PAN and some of the others here should put a proposal signed by all of us to try and get that sort of funding to get this thing started. Who runs it doesn't matter, whether it's Pan's organization, with your organization, Clare. I'm sure we'd all sign up to that if we could get funding.
That's a great idea. And again, I see the raised hands and I'll call on you in a moment, but I do want to kind of follow up on that point because I think, Karol, you bring up an excellent point that, you know, funding for these trials is difficult sometimes to get in when they're being conducted in high income countries and in low and lower middle income countries where these countries receive lower amounts of research funding. Generally, it can be even harder. So I'd like Atara, if you could comment on your experience and what you have kind of seen in terms of challenges and opportunities for funding for your trials, not only as repurposing trials, but as trials that are being conducted in Nigeria.
Yes, thank you very much. Funding is really an issue because although some organizations dedicate some funding to low medium income countries, which we apply to, otherwise competing globally is quite difficult because the facilities, the expertise, and the supports are not the same. But I know that some organizations like NIH, Wellcome, they have some special funding programs for people in low medium income countries, which we can all compete at the same level. But such is very limited. There are not so many. So we are still hoping that more funding should come down to low medium income countries so that we can be able to do some of the research work that we plan to do. Funding is limited. And as for the countries of the, especially Sub-Saharan Africa, there's very little contribution to research by those governments because they have so many other issues to tackle with infectious diseases and so on. So funding for especially cancer research is very, very low. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We do have somebody with a raised hand who's been waiting very patiently. Adel Ali Attia, do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question of the panel?
Yes, thank you. I am Dr. Adel Attia from Libya. I am Cancer Control Program Coordinator in Libya. I want to add to Dr. Ahmed Elzawawy one comment about treating metastatic breast cancer. We are using Xeloda tablet, which is capecitabine, or it is originally 5-fluorouracil. We will find in the guidelines Xeloda tablet as a treatment of metastatic breast cancer, NCCN guideline, ESMO guideline, but we don't find 5-fluorouracil as a treatment of metastatic breast cancer, although it is the same structure. 5-FU is a cheap drug, and no trial done about 5-FU in the treatment of metastatic breast cancer, because no sponsoring company, I think, which will allow doing such a trial on 5-FU.
Thank you.
You are.
So we can certainly talk about that specific example, but in addition to that example, and I'll let Ahmed comment on that. But before that, I'd like to ask Eduardo if you can kind of talk about, as we're talking about, as we've mentioned here, kind of bringing these repurposed therapies to the clinic. Whether it's through a clinical trial or whether it's through a change in guidelines, or whether it's through even getting patients interested in this. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how, and you alluded to this in your talk, about how getting these repurposed therapies into patients, into clinical practice can really help with costs, and whether it's alone as a single agent or in combination with standard of care therapy. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that, and sort of address this example with triple negative breast cancer, and then we can hear from Ahmed as well.
Yes, Claire, thank you. I believe that we need to establish a clear distinction between cancer care or cancer guidelines or cancer treatments and public policy. I think that this conversation should be framed in the concept of public policy. Why? Because the situations are not the same. I am not so sure that for many healthcare systems, anti-cancer drugs are expensive. There are a lot of demonstrations, France and other countries, that the use of anti-hypertensive agents for decades are much more costly to the governments than a few months of a high-cost anti-cancer drug. Another aspect is that talking with the people of the healthcare system in Argentina, cancer drugs is not in the priority list. The problem is that most of the third payers knows the cost of the price of the drugs. The analysis of the surgical cost of cancer, the analysis of the radiotherapy treatment of cancer, the cost of disabilities usually is not measured by many systems. So maybe a misunderstanding about the issue of cost of medications. Another aspect that I think it is necessary to put into the discussion is the fact that the political interest of governments and pharma companies is very similar. Governments with taxes and pharma companies with profit. So that is something real, and we need to deal with that. So possible options are another strategy, such as the use of repurposing drugs in combination, but with some agreement with the pharma companies that they will reduce the price of the new drug if they use a combination with a repurposed repurposed agent. But as Fan explained it very well, we need for this the absolute support from regulators. And regulators are following the old concept of a gold standard. And we are not talking about the gold standard. We are talking about possible good cancer care for the populations with existing resources and a limited budget. But that is not the concept of pharma companies. That is not the concept of clinical trials design. And that is not the concept of the use of treatments for the public. Breast cancer patients, myself, my family, we all want the newest drug, regardless of that the majority of the new high-cost treatments are not providing any cure and the survival time is short. But how we can explain and educate our populations and governments that there are things that are cheaper, better, and more affordable. That is our real work, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for those thoughts. Like I said, we could talk about this topic for hours and hours and hours, but we're coming towards the end of our discussion. So before we transition to conclusions and closing remarks, I'd like to invite Professor Will Ngwa to join the conversation. Will is he's a professor at Johns Hopkins University and also the founder of the Global Health Catalyst group, which is focused specifically on improving global cancer care. They just had their summit in Washington, D.C. I was there, Ahmed was there, and perhaps some of the others on this call were there as well. It was a really great event. So Will, if you'd like to join the discussion and give your perspective, that would be great.
Well, unmute your phone, your contribution. Is there? Hmm?
Will, are you able to join the conversation?
Anyway, if he can join, if when the connection is okay. Can I add something?
Yep, absolutely, Ahmed. You can add something, and then I'd be happy to turn it over to you for closing remarks because I know we're getting close to time.
Yes, I would like to say that our mission together is not to convince people to change their guidelines or change their protocols, because they can't. Simply, they can't. They have guidelines, ASCO guidelines, national guidelines, and so on. But we have a great job together, if you agree together, to form a nucleus for something that scientific work and publication that lead to change the concepts, change also in a smart way, that appealing and convincing that it will be beneficial to all, even pharmaceutical company, even what is the value of changing regulation for this. But if you ask just to change regulation, nobody will really change the regulation. We should be convincing on what is the benefit of all this. So this is I think we need a lot of work together and be in nucleus together, if you agree with the discussion and with all, to form this group that need a lot of scientific evidence. It's not talk, not like a cancer charity, something. We have all these in festivals, in cancer summits, in cancer disparities and all these things. But we need to have scientific approaches and also introduce some people of business, because it is how to show this from the business point of view, from the money point of view. It could be very beneficial. I am not a professional in this. I am a doctor, so I can't convince people with business. But it needs some people. It's not health economic, but it's business. It is real business. How to convince them, give them the argument, give them scientific evidence give them why the regulation could be more easier as pan, whatever we say pan, nobody will hear because there's interest behind this. So how to make them convinced that they have interest in some in that, in repurposing, and then in the other webinar after about how to lower the cost of cancer care is not for just for humanitarian reason, but for economic reasons. There will be collapse, there will be crisis for all. Nobody would, no part of the world can support the continuation of this way as we are. So we ask ASCO to be to raise the flag. Thanks to ASCO to be here to raise the flag and to be this to ask organization, not to ASCO colleagues, because they have also limitations. They can't change their prescriptions, but ask organization to raise the flag with us from the scientific and business point of view. Thank you. I see Lawrencia. Clare, if you can invite her.
Yes, Lawrencia, if you want to have the last question before we wrap up, please share.
Great. Thank you all so much for the wonderful presentations. Ahmed, thank you. It was nice meeting you at the GHC Summit, and I hope we can continue our collaborations. And Claire, it was a pity I didn't get to meet you, but we are communicating per email, so we will keep on that. And I am a person, I'm a gynecologist, by the way, and I really like action. As a surgeon, I really, really appreciate it when we come to action, when we take action. So I will urge us to form a group, a working party, a whatever, to make this happen. Because we can continue meeting and sharing ideas. But if we don't come together to want to achieve something, we are going to be meeting for the next 10 years. And it will be small satellites of research being done there, everybody doing their own thing. So I urge Claire to please make sure we're coming together as a team, a working party, however we will be called, a collaborative whatever, to make sure we make this happen, because there are a lot of benefits for our patients, the patients that we see that we can't do anything for. There are a lot of things that we can still do for people if we're able to move this initiative forward. Please, let's make it happen. Thank you so much for this wonderful seminar. Thank you all.
Well, thank you for that very powerful call for action. I really appreciate it. And we will continue to see how we can move this forward, not just by talking, but by actions and impact. So again, I want to thank all the panelists for their time and efforts today. I think it's been a really great discussion. I'm going to turn it back over now to Ahmed and David to close us out of the seminar. But thank you all for attending, and thank you all for participating. I really appreciate it.
I leave the final word for Professor David Kerr. And I'm asking him as a chair of committee in ASCO, International Affairs Committee in ASCO, and chair of one of the big chair of our initiative, to have a second meeting for this and follow-up meeting. We'll have together, and I'll be deeply grateful to Claire to write a report about this meeting, and then we have to develop it into publication together, all the authors, all the panelists and the discussant, and who raise their hands and they provide. And this is nucleus for a group, working group on this, like Lawrencia said, and this will be after. This is just a start, and will be follow up. And then we'll have another meeting after 6 months or one year, at whatever you like or whatever you decide together, and keep contact together. Just please, Claire, make a group for email or something for all of us. And this is the group of repurposing ASCO, GOIS-ASCO. So it will be especially for this. And then if you have idea, If our colleague have idea, if you invite colleagues for idea, then we'll be together around this. And for example, Hussein Khaled asking about CuresWithinReach. My brother Hussein, I sent for you many things about CuresWithinReach and about the program, about the grants. And thanks for this meeting that attract your attention for this. So start, and we need you inside. We need you, and we need all colleagues inside to be leaders. Then I leave because you have short of time, so I leave the floor for Professor Edward David Kerr, and I'm asking here to hold another meetings and follow up meeting to be also GOIS-ASCO, and we ask the ASCO to raise the flag of this in their conference, in their journals and everything. Not just to speak with the colleagues and convince them to change the prescription. This is very difficult. Thank you, David. Thank you all, really.
No, thanks, Ahmed. And of course, thanks to all the panelists, the speakers, everyone for joining us, Clare for her excellent chairmanship and for keeping the discussion going. I think Lawrencia caught it very well that we would like to keep this group together in some size, shape or form. I think capturing many of the themes and ideas that we've had in a publication, ASCO's Journal of Global Oncology, I think would be an ideal place for us to put something. And of course, to speak to our great friend David Collingridge, who's editor of Lancet Oncology and who's very interested in all the work that we're doing. And again, very happy to approach both those journals on our behalves. One of the challenges that Clare made to us was, what challenges does this field face in terms of moving forward? And for me, thinking a little about it, listening to these excellent presentations, some of it is pharmacology. For example, if we look at valproic acid, mentioned both by Clare and by Pan, it's a relatively weak histone deacetylase inhibitor, so its binding efficiency is not absolutely fantastic, and that's why people overlook it. And one of the things that occurred to me when we were chatting, if we look at modern screening against cancer drug targets, looking at novel chemical entities and so on, the field has advanced so rapidly with modern technology, modern biology, AI, that the idea of us coming together to say, here are 500 novel chemical structures, but these are existing drugs with all the benefits that we've heard from Pan, from Clare moving forward, but insisting that these chemicals should be inserted in any screen, whether it's academic, whether it's from the pharmaceutical company or so on, to see if we can actually find any new hits against any of these emerging new cancer targets. So there's a very strong way that, again, that we can build in the platform of science. Actually, some very interesting things that we can do together. I think we have a committed group of, a committed and experienced group of clinical trialists. And again, people who would work with Clare, with Pan, to see what we could do to design cost-effective and cost-efficient trials to move these interesting drugs into the right indication, always trying to match the drug to the disease, the right stage of treatment and so on. So for me, I feel energized. I feel that there are new ideas that we could promulgate and bring together. I think we build on a platform of strong science, passionate commitment, and a sense that this work is needed. Effectively, globally, cancer care is broken, and we need initiatives of this sort to see what we can do collectively to restore some sense of world order and to reduce the inequities that we've all discussed and heard about today. But at its core will be us using our standing, our science, our feeling as to how we can drive this forward. And I think that will capture the attention, as Karol has said, as amplified by Eduardo and Twalib, of potential funding bodies, the sorts of ideas that we could work with Ngwa to go to the Cancer Moonshot with some very clear ideas as to how this group could take it forward. So it's been great. I feel energized. I really, really do. And I think we will work to keep the group together, Lawrencia. That's a commitment and promise in a variety of different ways. So I think this isn't saying goodbye. I think it's au revoir until we meet again, and to say thanks again to everybody for coming together. And I sort of feel young again and, ready for the fight. This is a good thing. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you all.
Take
would
care.
like to tell you.
Thank you.
I would like
Bye,
to tell you.
everyone. Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
I would like to
Bye.
tell you just that this is being registered, and you will have beside me Mahmoud Al-Masri, the coordinator of GOIS, that will send within 2 days, 3 days maximum the record of this. The ownership of this record is all of you, all the panelists, all the discussants, and this is your. Please feel that is yours and distribute the message everywhere. It needs a lot of people to be in, and we prepare together to the second seminars. It is need some time about a group of seminars about how to lower the total cost of cancer, of systemic cancer care, and after other things. We are working together, but this is repurposing. This is a start. And Claire, please form a group of WhatsApp or group of email that we change together ideas. If we have something, if Pan have something to add, if Karol, Sikora, if Professor Eduardo Cazap would like that. So it is grouped to this continuous workforce for such purpose. Thank you all, and this is start. You receive the record. You are all the owner of this with ASCO. And I send this to ASCO, and I ask ASCO to distribute it as one of the documents of ASCO also. Thank you all. Thank you.
Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.
Yeah,